My name is Eva, and I am 62 years old. After standing alone at my husband Richard's funeral yesterday, I still can't believe our 3 children chose parties and work events over saying goodbye to their father of 40 years. The man who taught them to ride bikes, helped with math homework, and never missed a single game. Now I'm left with an empty house and a broken heart. But what I decided to do the next morning would change everything. If you're watching this, please let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button, and stay tuned to hear what happens when a grieving widow finally says, "Enough is enough." I met Richard during my sophomore year of college in 1981. He was this tall, slightly awkward math major with kind brown eyes and a laugh that would fill a room. I was studying nursing and barely keeping up with my anatomy classes when we bumped into each other at the campus library. He offered to help me study, and after our 3rd session, he asked me out for coffee. 1 year later, we were engaged, and by 1983, we were married in a small ceremony with just close family and friends. We settled in a modest suburban neighborhood outside of Chicago, buying our first home, a small 2-bedroom fixer-upper that Richard spent weekends renovating. We were young, hopeful, and madly in love. Richard secured a position teaching math at the local high school, while I worked as a nurse at Chicago Memorial Hospital. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that always felt like more than enough. When James was born in 1985, our little family began to grow. Richard would come home from teaching, immediately take James from my tired arms and walk him around the living room, pointing out colors and shapes. "He's going to be brilliant," Richard would say, beaming with pride. 3 years later came Allison, our artistic middle child, who could draw before she could properly speak. Then, in 1991, Sophia completed our family, our youngest, with her father's analytical mind and my stubborn determination. Our home was chaotic, but filled with love. Richard coached Little League Baseball for James, even though he had never played the sport himself. He learned alongside our son, staying up late, reading rule books, and watching games on TV. When Allison showed interest in design, Richard built her a special desk by the window, where the light was perfect for drawing. For Sophia, he created elaborate math games that made her giggle while learning multiplication tables. Every summer, we took family road trips in our old station wagon. We couldn't afford fancy vacations, but Richard made adventures out of visiting national parks and small towns across America. He kept a detailed map where the kids would place colorful pins on each location we visited. Someday, he'd tell them, "This map will be filled with your adventures." Richard worked tirelessly for our children. He took on extra tutoring jobs to save for their college funds, often coming home exhausted, but never complaining. He'd still find energy to listen to James practice his debate speech, help Allison with her science project, or play chess with Sophia. I remember the pride in his eyes at each graduation, each accomplishment, each milestone. As the children grew older and left for college, I noticed the first signs of distance. Calls became less frequent, visits shorter, and centered around what we could do for them, rather than quality time together. Richard never complained, always making excuses for them. "They're building their own lives," he'd say. "That's what we raised them to do." But I could see the hurt in his eyes when holidays became rushed affairs, or when they'd cancel plans last minute. James graduated from business school and landed a prestigious job at an investment firm in New York. He quickly became consumed with climbing the corporate ladder, missing family gatherings for work commitments. His calls became brief updates about promotions and bonuses, rarely asking about our lives. Allison moved to Los Angeles after art school, working her way up in fashion design. Her social media was filled with celebrity clients and glamorous events, but actual visits home became rare. When she did visit, she spent most of her time on her phone or complaining about Chicago's lack of culture. Sophia, despite living just 30 minutes away in downtown Chicago, seemed the most distant of all. Her marketing career became her identity, and her friend group of young professionals replaced family time. She would promise Sunday dinners, but cancel more often than not. Richard never stopped trying to maintain those connections. He would mail handwritten letters to each of them monthly. He kept track of their accomplishments in a special journal, cutting out magazine mentions of Allison's designs or saving newspaper clippings about James's firm. For Sophia's birthday 2 years ago, he surprised her at her office with lunch, only to be told she was too busy and could he leave it at reception. When Richard was diagnosed with heart disease 2 years ago, our world shifted dramatically. The doctor explained that his condition was serious. Years of stress and undiagnosed high blood pressure had damaged his heart. I immediately stepped back from my nursing shifts to care for him. We called the children right away, explaining the severity of the situation. They all expressed concern, promised visits, but those promises materialized into brief obligatory appearances. James flew in for one weekend, spending most of it on work calls from our guest room. Allison sent expensive flower arrangements, but claimed she was in the middle of a big project and couldn't get away. Sophia would stop by occasionally with takeout food, staying just long enough to eat before heading out to meet friends. Throughout his illness, Richard never complained about their absence. Instead, he focused on the good memories, often telling me stories about when they were young. "Remember when James caught his first fish?" he'd say. Or, "Remember how Allison would sing in the backyard?" He kept their photos by his bedside and watched their social media updates like small windows into their lives. As his strength declined, Richard's greatest wish was for a reconciliation, for his family to be close again before he was gone. "I just want them to remember what matters," he told me one night, his voice weak but determined. "Not the careers or the money, but the love we shared." I promised him I would try to bring the family together, a promise I desperately wanted to keep, but ultimately could not fulfill. The call came on a Tuesday morning in April. Richard's cardiologist sounded grave on the phone. "His latest tests are concerning Mrs. Howard. The medication isn't working as well as we'd hoped. I think you should prepare the family." I immediately called each of our children, the urgency clear in my voice. "Your father's condition has worsened significantly," I told them. "The doctor says we need to prepare for the worst. Please, if you can come home now, it would mean everything to him." James promised to check his calendar and see when he could get away from New York. Allison mentioned a major fashion show she was preparing for, but said she would try her best to visit in the next few weeks. Sophia, despite living so close, explained that her work schedule was completely packed, but she would definitely try to visit that weekend. I returned to Richard's bedside with a forced smile, unwilling to add to his burden by sharing our children's lukewarm responses. He saw through it anyway. After 40 years together, he could read me like one of his beloved mathematics textbooks. "They're not coming, are they?" he asked, his voice soft but resigned. "They're busy right now," I replied, adjusting his pillow. "They'll be here soon." He reached for my hand, his grip weaker than the day before. "Ava, it's okay. I understand. They have their own lives now." "But you're their father," I said, unable to keep the frustration from my voice. "They should be here." Richard shook his head slightly. "We raised them to be independent, to chase their dreams. We can't fault them for doing exactly that." "There's a difference between independence and indifference," I argued, but stopped when I saw the pain flash across his face. Not physical pain, but something deeper. Over the next week, Richard's condition deteriorated rapidly. The doctors increased his medications, but his heart was simply wearing out. I stayed by his side day and night, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair, holding his hand through the worst episodes. Each day, I sent updates to our children, including pictures of Richard and pleas to visit soon. The responses grew shorter. James sent a fruit basket to the hospital room. Allison scheduled a brief video call where she showed Richard sketches of her new clothing line, barely asking about his condition. Sophia dropped by for 20 minutes between meetings, standing awkwardly at the foot of the bed before making an excuse about a work emergency. On what would be his final night, Richard seemed unusually alert. The nurse warned me that sometimes patients experience a brief surge of energy before the end, but I pushed that thought away, clinging to hope. "Tell me about our first apartment again." Richard requested, a small smile playing on his lips. I described the tiny one-bedroom with the leaky faucet, the way we'd furnished it with second-hand finds, how we'd painted the kitchen yellow to bring in light. "And the kids' first Christmas," he prompted. For hours we traveled through our memories together, revisiting the life we'd built. Around 3 a.m, he grew tired, but insisted on staying awake. "I need to tell you something, Eva," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I leaned closer, holding his hand between both of mine. "You have been everything to me," he said. "My heart, my home, my world. I want you to know that no man has ever been loved better." Tears spilled down my cheeks. "Richard, please don't." "Let me finish," he insisted gently. "When I'm gone, I want you to be angry if you need to be, sad if you need to be. But then I want you to live, Eva. Really live. Promise me." "I promise," I whispered, though I couldn't imagine a world without him in it. "And the children?" He continued each word, seeming to cost him strength. "They'll realize someday what matters. Be patient with them, but don't let them take advantage of your kindness. You deserve better." I nodded, unable to speak through my tears. "I love you, my Eva," he said, squeezing my hand with the last of his strength. "Always have. Always will." Those were his final words to me. Richard slipped away peacefully as dawn broke his hand still in mine. The room felt suddenly vast and empty, though nothing had changed except the steady beep of the monitor, now flattened into a continuous tone. The nurses were kind, giving me time alone with him before they came to perform their final duties. I sat there still holding his hand as it grew cold, wondering how 40 years together could end so quietly. When I finally found the strength to call our children, each conversation followed the same pattern. Initial shock, rehearsed expressions of grief, and then immediate concerns about logistics. "I have this huge meeting on Thursday," James said after expressing his condolences. "Is there any way the funeral could be on Friday instead?" "I'm so sorry, Mom," Allison responded. "This is such terrible timing with the spring collection launch next week. I'll try my absolute best to make it work." Sophia seemed the most affected, actually crying on the phone, but even she quickly pivoted to practical matters. "Would Dad have wanted something formal? I'm not sure I have appropriate clothes with me in Chicago." I answered their questions mechanically, a strange calm settling over me. I had just lost my husband, my partner, my best friend, and their primary concern was how his death might inconvenience their schedules. After hanging up, I sat in the quiet hospital room and made a promise to Richard that I would handle everything with the dignity he deserved. I would give him a proper goodbye regardless of who attended. The next few days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements. I selected Richard's favorite Navy suit, the one he'd worn to each child's college graduation. I chose music he loved, classical pieces that he would play on Sunday mornings while grading papers. I asked his closest colleague to deliver a eulogy, as I wasn't sure I could speak without breaking down. I wrote the obituary myself, detailing his 40 years of teaching, the thousands of students whose lives he'd touched, his passion for mathematics and education, his devotion as a husband and father. I included a photograph of him from last summer, before his illness had taken too much of a toll. his kind eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled at the camera. Throughout these preparations, I kept our children updated, confirming that the service would be on Wednesday afternoon, giving them ample time to arrange travel. All three initially confirmed they would attend, and I allowed myself a small measure of relief that Richard would have his family present to honor his memory. 3 days before the funeral, as I was finalizing details with the funeral home, my phone rang. James's name flashed on the screen. "Mom, I've hit a snag," he began without preamble. "There's an emergency meeting with our biggest client. They're flying in from Tokyo specifically to meet with me." I listened in disbelief as he continued to explain the importance of this meeting, the potential promotion it could lead to, how his boss had made it clear this was a make-or-break opportunity. "Your father's funeral is a one-time event," I finally interrupted. "This job will have other clients, other meetings." "You don't understand the corporate world, Mom," James replied, his tone frustratingly patient, as though explaining something simple to a child. "These opportunities don't come around often. Dad would understand. He always supported my career." "Your father wanted his family together one last time," I said, my voice cracking. "He asked for so little from you children." "I'll try to catch a late flight after the meeting," he offered, though we both knew it wouldn't happen. "I'm really sorry, Mom. I'll call you after the funeral, okay?" The next blow came that evening. A text from Allison, not even a call. "Mom, I'm devastated, but I can't get out of this event. It's for my biggest celebrity client and it's been planned for months. Her stylist specifically requested my presence. Can we do a private memorial when I'm in town next month? Love you." I didn't respond. What could I possibly say? I held out hope that Sophia at least would attend. She lived in the city, had no travel constraints, and had seemed genuinely upset by her father's passing. But the morning of the funeral, as I was putting on the black dress I'd bought years ago for a colleague's funeral, my phone chimed with a message. "Mom, I'm so sorry to do this last minute. My friend Amanda is having a birthday celebration today, and I completely forgot I promised to help organize it months ago. She would be heartbroken if I canceled now. I feel terrible about missing Dad's service. But could I come by your house tomorrow instead? I love you." I stared at the phone, my hands shaking with disbelief and a rage so profound it frightened me. I had raised these people. Richard and I had poured our heart souls and every spare dollar into giving them good lives, teaching them values, showing them what it meant to be part of a family. And now, when it mattered most, when all we asked was for them to show up for their father one last time, they all had better things to do. I finished dressing in silence, applied minimal makeup, and gathered the eulogy I had written late last night when I realized I might be the only family member present to speak for Richard. The house felt suffocating in its emptiness. I couldn't bear to look at the family photos on the walls, images of smiling faces that now felt like strangers. The drive to the funeral home was surreal. I kept expecting my phone to ring for one of the children to call and say they had reconsidered that they were on their way. But the only call was from the funeral director confirming the start time. When I arrived, I sat in the parking lot for several minutes, gathering my strength. "I can do this for you, Richard," I whispered. One last act of love. The funeral home had set up the room for about 50 people, a reasonable estimation given Richard's long teaching career and community involvement. I had sent notices to his school to former colleagues, to neighbors and friends. Surely some would come to honor this good man. But as I entered and took my seat in the front row, I realized just how empty the room was. 2 elderly former teachers from Richard's department sat together near the back. Our neighbor, Mrs. Patel, who had often brought over homemade curry when Richard was ill, sat quietly in the middle row. The funeral director hovered near the door, his expression professionally sympathetic, but with an undercurrent of pity that made my cheeks burn with humiliation. No former students, no friends from the community center where Richard had volunteered teaching adult literacy after retirement, and most glaringly, no children. No family except me. As the service began, the celebrant spoke to a nearly empty room, his words about Richard's life and legacy echoing hollowly. I sat rigidly in my seat, determined not to break down to maintain the dignity that Richard deserved, even if I was the only one there to witness it. When it came time for me to speak, I approached the podium on unsteady legs. I looked out at the sparse gathering and swallowed hard against the lump in my throat. Richard Howard was not a famous man, I began. He didn't have wealth or power or recognition beyond his classroom. What he had was a profound understanding of what truly matters in life: kindness, integrity, and love. My voice grew stronger as I spoke about our 40 years together, about Richard's dedication to his students, his unwavering moral compass, his gentle humor, and his boundless capacity for love. I shared stories that made the few attendees smile and nod in recognition of the man they had known. Richard believed that a life well lived wasn't measured by achievements or accolades, but by the lives you touched and the love you shared. I continued. By that measure, Richard lived a rich and meaningful life, even if this room doesn't reflect the true impact he had. I couldn't help the edge that crept into my voice with those last words. A flash of anger broke through my careful composure, but I quickly reined it in. This was Richard's farewell, not the time for my bitterness. After the brief service, the funeral director led our tiny procession to the cemetery. The 3 attendees offered awkward condolences before departing, leaving me alone with the cemetery workers and the celebrant for the actual burial. I watched as they lowered Richard's casket into the ground, a physical manifestation of the finality I had been trying to deny. The celebrant said a few more words, squeezed my shoulder kindly, and then he too left, undoubtedly heading to his next service where perhaps the deceased would be deemed worthy of actual attendance by their family. Standing alone by the fresh grave, I finally allowed my tears to fall freely. "I'm so sorry, Richard," I whispered. "You deserved better than this, so much better." The drive home was a blur. I remember stopping at a red light and checking my phone out of habit. There was a notification from Instagram. Sophia had posted photos of herself at what appeared to be a lavish birthday lunch, cocktail in hand, wide smile for the camera. The timestamp showed it was taken during her father's funeral service. With shaking hands, I checked Facebook to find James had checked in at a high-end sushi restaurant in Manhattan with clients, his post boasting about closing the deal of the year. Allison's fashion label had posted photos of her adjusting a gown on a young actress I vaguely recognized from television, captioned, "Final fittings with our favorite star for tonight's gala." Something hardened inside me, then a resolve forming like ice crystals in my veins. I drove the rest of the way home in silence, no longer crying, no longer even grieving in the same way. The sadness was still there, vast and bottomless, but now it was accompanied by something else: determination. The house felt different when I returned from the funeral. Emptier without Richard, of course, but also somehow charged with purpose. I changed out of my funeral clothes into Richard's old cardigan and comfortable pants, needing to feel some connection to him. In our bedroom, Richard's reading glasses still sat on his nightstand next to the book he would never finish. His slippers remained where he had last stepped out of them. His closet held clothes still bearing his scent, the subtle mix of his cologne and the peppermint candies he always kept in his pockets. I sat on his side of the bed and allowed myself one more moment of pure grief before beginning what I knew would be a long night ahead. First, I went to his home office, a small converted bedroom where he had spent countless hours grading papers and planning lessons. The room was meticulously organized, bookshelves lined with mathematics textbooks and novels, his desk clear, except for a framed family photo from when the children were young. I opened his desk drawers, finding them neatly arranged with office supplies, folders of household documents, and his personal journals. In the bottom drawer, I found what I was looking for: 3 sealed envelopes with each child's name written in Richard's careful handwriting. Next to them lay a larger envelope labeled Will and Financial Information. I set aside the children's letters, unable to bear reading them just yet. Instead, I opened the financial envelope, spreading the contents across his desk. Richard had always handled our finances, keeping me informed of major decisions, but managing the day-to-day details himself. What I found surprised me. Despite his modest teacher's salary, Richard had been an exceptionally careful planner and investor. His retirement account was substantially larger than I had realized. He had maintained a separate life insurance policy worth $200,000. There were investment statements showing a diversified portfolio that had performed remarkably well over decades of patient growth. Most surprising was a small notebook detailing additional investments he had made specifically for each child. Education funds that had remained untouched after their college expenses were covered, growing quietly over the years. According to his notes, he had planned to give these funds to the children when he reached 70, a milestone he would never see now. As I continued searching through his office, I found a large plastic container in the closet. Inside were carefully preserved mementos for each child: James's first baseball glove and trophy, Allison's earliest fashion sketches, Sophia's math competition medals. Richard had saved art projects, report cards, letters from camp, and dozens of photographs documenting their childhoods. Each item was wrapped carefully, some with notes explaining their significance. James, age 8, first home run. Allison's design that won the high school art show. Sophia's letter when she got into Chicago University. The contrast between Richard's careful preservation of these memories and our children's casual dismissal of his funeral cut me to the core. I found myself talking to him as though he were still there, sitting in his office chair. "They've forgotten everything we taught them, Richard," I said to the empty room. "When did they become so selfish? Where did we go wrong?" As the night progressed, I continued my exploration, finding photo albums in the living room bookcase. I poured myself a glass of Richard's favorite whiskey, something I rarely drank but needed tonight, and began looking through the visual history of our family. There we were, young and hopeful, with baby James. There was Richard teaching Allison to ride a bike, his hand steadying the seat as she grinned with determination. Sophia on Richard's shoulders at the zoo, both laughing at something now lost to time. Page after page documented birthdays, holidays, graduations, the milestones that had shaped our family life. In almost every photo, Richard beamed with pride at his children, his love for them unmistakable. I began to notice a pattern as the children grew older. Their smiles became more perfunctory, their postures suggesting impatience. In the last family photo taken 3 Christmases ago, James was checking his watch. Allison was half turned away, and Sophia was clearly typing on her phone beneath the table. Only Richard and I were fully present, our smiles becoming strained with the effort of maintaining the illusion of family harmony. Around 2 a.m, exhausted but unable to sleep, I opened my laptop and began checking our children's social media more thoroughly. What I found confirmed what I had already begun to suspect. Our children had long ago prioritized career, social status, and material success over family connections. James's feed was a carefully curated display of professional achievements, luxury vacations, and networking events. Not a single post mentioned his father's illness over the past 2 years. Allison documented celebrity encounters and fashion shows, occasionally posting throwback photos of her childhood, but none that included Richard or me. Sophia's social circle appeared to be exclusively young professionals, whose idea of family seemed limited to brunch gatherings with friends they called family by choice. The whiskey glass empty, my resolve hardened into something unshakable. I found myself writing in a journal I had not touched in years, pouring out my feelings, my disappointments, and finally, my decision. Richard gave everything for these children, I wrote. His time, his energy, his love, and ultimately his hopes for a family that would remain connected through life's challenges. They have rejected that gift in the most profound way possible. There must be consequences. I began sketching out a plan, the details becoming clearer as the night progressed. By dawn, I had made my decision. Richard's legacy would not be squandered on children who couldn't be bothered to attend his funeral. Instead, it would serve a greater purpose, one that would honor the values he had lived by, but had failed to instill in his own children. As the first light of morning filtered through the curtains, I finally fell into an exhausted sleep, still wearing Richard's cardigan, clutching the family photo album to my chest. My last thought before drifting off was not of sadness, but of purpose. "I know what I need to do now, Richard," I whispered. "I'll make this right." The next morning, I woke with unusual clarity, despite only a few hours of fitful sleep. The house was quiet, the silence no longer oppressive, but expectant, as if the very walls were waiting to see what I would do next. I made coffee in Richard's favorite mug, a chipped ceramic one given to him by a student 20 years ago with "World's Most Patient Teacher" printed on the side. The familiar ritual brought a strange comfort, almost as if I were preparing the morning coffee for both of us, as I had done for decades. Sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee and Richard's worn leather notebook, I began making calls. First was to Martin Goldstein, our attorney, who had helped us draft our wills years ago. "Eva, I was so sorry to hear about Richard," Martin said, his voice warm with genuine sympathy. "I wanted to attend the service, but I'm in Boston at a conference. How are you holding up?" "I need to make some changes, Martin," I said, bypassing the customary exchange of condolences. "To Richard's will, to everything. Can I see you today? It's urgent." There must have been something in my voice that conveyed my determination, because Martin didn't question the urgency. "I'll rearrange my afternoon. Can you come to my office at 2? "I'll be there," I promised, hanging up before he could ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. Next, I called our financial advisor requesting copies of all account statements and beneficiary information be emailed immediately. "I'm making significant changes," I explained, "and I need to understand exactly where everything stands." With those calls made, I opened my laptop and began researching charitable organizations. Richard had always been passionate about education, particularly helping underprivileged students access higher learning. He had tutored students for free when they couldn't afford extra help and had written countless recommendation letters that helped secure scholarships. I found a foundation that provided college scholarships to disadvantaged students pursuing teaching careers, a perfect reflection of Richard's life's work. Their website showed smiling graduates in caps and gowns, many the first in their families to attend college, now entering classrooms to inspire the next generation. Next, I researched heart disease research foundations, quickly identifying one with an excellent reputation that focused on preventative education as well as cutting-edge research. Given how Richard's condition had gone undetected until it was too severe, this cause felt especially meaningful. Finally, I looked into the community center where Richard had volunteered after retirement, teaching basic mathematics to adults seeking GEDs or better employment. The center served predominantly immigrant communities and single parents, people striving to improve their lives through education, something Richard had deeply respected. By noon, I had compiled detailed information on all three organizations, including their mission statements, financial efficiency ratings, and contact information for their planned giving departments. I made myself a simple lunch I barely tasted, my mind focused entirely on the task ahead. Before leaving for the attorney's office, I took a moment to find Richard's wedding ring, which the funeral home had returned to me along with his watch and wallet. I slipped the simple gold band onto my thumb, needing to carry a piece of him with me for what I was about to do. Martin's office was in a modest building downtown. His practice focused on family law and estate planning. His assistant led me immediately to his office upon arrival, her eyes filled with sympathy I could barely acknowledge. Martin rose from behind his desk when I entered, coming around to embrace me briefly before guiding me to a chair. "Eva, again, my deepest condolences. Richard was a wonderful man." "Yes, he was," I agreed, setting my purse on the floor beside me and placing Richard's notebook on the desk between us. "And that's why I'm here, Martin. His legacy deserves to be honored properly." Martin nodded, clearly expecting a minor adjustment to the will, perhaps changing executors or updating beneficiary percentages. What I outlined over the next hour left him visibly stunned. "You want to disinherit your children?" he asked, making sure he understood correctly. "Not entirely," I clarified. "I want to leave each of them $10,000, enough to show they weren't forgotten, but a fraction of what Richard had intended for them. The bulk of the estate should be divided equally among these 3 organizations." I slid the folder across his desk with the information I had compiled on each charity. "Eva, while I understand you're grieving and clearly upset with your children, this is a significant decision that will permanently affect your family relationships," Martin said carefully. "Perhaps you should take some time to—" "They didn't come to their father's funeral," I interrupted, my voice steady. "James chose a business meeting. Allison chose a celebrity fitting. Sophia chose a friend's birthday party. While I stood alone at Richard's grave, they were posting on social media about their wonderful days." I met Martin's gaze directly. "Tell me, what would you do?" Martin sat back in his chair, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. "Legally, you have every right to do this. As Richard's widow and the co-owner of these assets, you can direct them as you see fit. I just want to make sure you're certain." "I've never been more certain of anything," I replied. "Richard spent his life teaching others the importance of consequences for actions. It's time our children learned that lesson too." Over the next 2 hours, we drafted the necessary documents to amend Richard's will, change beneficiary designations on insurance policies and retirement accounts, and create trust arrangements for the charitable donations. Martin's assistant notarized everything, and by late afternoon, the legal framework was in place. "There's one more thing," I said as we finished. "I need help drafting letters to each of my children explaining this decision. I want them to understand exactly why this is happening." Martin agreed to help, though his expression remained troubled. As I left his office, he touched my arm gently. "Ava, Richard would be proud of your strength. Just remember, doors can be hard to reopen once firmly closed." "Some doors," I replied, "should remain closed until proper apologies are offered." Back home, I spent the evening drafting those letters. I wrote without anger, but with unflinching honesty about their absence at the funeral, about the years of growing distance, about Richard's heartbreak as they had pulled away. I explained in detail how their inheritance would now benefit students and patients and community members who would value what they had taken for granted. I concluded each letter the same way. Your father believed in second chances and redemption. He also believed in earning what you receive. Should you wish to reconnect with genuine remorse and a commitment to the values he lived by, my door remains open. The choice, as always, is yours. After sealing each letter in an envelope, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time since Richard's diagnosis, I felt I was acting with purpose rather than simply reacting to circumstances beyond my control. As I prepared for bed that night, I spoke aloud to Richard as if he could hear me. "I don't know if this is what you would have done," I admitted to the empty room. "You are always more forgiving than me. But they need to understand that actions have consequences, that family means showing up when it matters most. I hope you can understand that." As I drifted off to sleep, I felt an unusual sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, I had honored Richard in the way that felt most true to the values we had shared for 40 years. The aftermath of my decision unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. The letters were delivered by courier the following day, ensuring they would arrive simultaneously to each child. I had specifically requested confirmation of delivery, so I knew precisely when the bombs I had crafted would detonate in their carefully constructed lives. James called first, his voice oscillating between disbelief and outrage. "Mom, this has to be some kind of sick joke," he began, not bothering with a greeting. "You can't possibly be serious about this Will nonsense." "It's not nonsense, James," I replied calmly. "And yes, I am entirely serious." "This is grief talking," he insisted. "You're not thinking clearly. Dad would never have wanted this." "Your father wanted his children at his funeral," I countered. "He wanted a family that valued connection over convenience. He didn't get either of those things." "I had an unavoidable work commitment," James's voice rose. "My entire career was on the line. And your choice has consequences," I said simply. "Just as all choices do." "I'll fight this," he threatened, his banker's mind immediately turning to legal recourse. "I'll contest the will. You can't just change everything on a whim." "You're welcome to try," I responded, Martin's careful legal work giving me confidence. "But Richard and I owned everything jointly. As his widow, I have full legal right to distribute our assets as I see fit. The changes have already been made." The conversation devolved from there, with James alternating between threats and attempts to make me feel guilty. When he finally hung up with a curt, "You'll be hearing from my attorney," I felt oddly unbothered. The James who had called was not the son we had raised, but a stranger who had long ago replaced family values with financial ones. Allison's reaction came via a series of increasingly frantic text messages, culminating in a tearful video call. Unlike her brother, she tried emotional manipulation rather than legal threats. "Mom, please!" she sobbed, her perfectly made-up face streaked with tears. "I'm going through so much right now. This fashion line is make or break for my career. I wanted to be at Dad's funeral, you know I did, but this opportunity was once in a lifetime." "Your father's funeral was also once in a lifetime," I pointed out quietly. "That's not fair," she protested. "Dad would have understood. He always supported my dreams." "He supported you," I corrected. "There's a difference. He wanted you to succeed, but not at the expense of your humanity, your connection to family." "I loved Dad," she insisted. "You can't punish me for missing one day, no matter how important that day was." "This isn't punishment, Allison. It's a consequence. And it's not about the money. It's about what the money represents. Your father worked his entire life to leave something for children who couldn't even spare a few hours to say goodbye to him." The conversation circled painfully until Allison finally whispered, "What can I do to fix this?" It was the first genuine question any of them had asked. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But it would start with understanding why this happened and taking responsibility for your choices." Sophia's approach was the most direct. The day after receiving the letter, she showed up at my door unannounced, barging in as soon as I opened it. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, waving the letter in my face. "You're giving away our inheritance to strangers because we missed one event." "Not just any event, Sophia. Your father's funeral. And not just any strangers. People who embody the values your father lived by. Values you and your siblings have clearly forgotten." Sophia paced the living room, her marketing executive confidence momentarily shaken. "This is insane. You're acting like we never cared about Dad at all." "Actions speak louder than words," I said simply. "Your actions showed exactly how much you cared." It was terrible timing, she exclaimed. Amanda had been planning that birthday for months. I would have looked like a terrible friend if I'd canceled. I stared at her, genuinely dumbfounded by her priorities. But looking like a terrible daughter by missing your father's funeral was acceptable. The question hung in the air between us. For a brief moment, I saw something like genuine shame cross Sophia's face before her defenses slammed back into place. "You're being cruel," she accused. "Dad wouldn't have wanted this." "Your father wanted a family that showed up for each other," I replied. "Not just when it was convenient, but especially when it was difficult. That's what family means." After Sophia left, slamming the door behind her with a promise to fix this ridiculous situation, I sat alone in the sudden quiet of the house. The confrontations had been exhausting, but also clarifying. None of them had expressed genuine remorse, only anger at the consequences and concern about losing their expected windfalls. The next few weeks brought escalating attempts to change my mind. James did indeed consult an attorney who apparently informed him that his case was weak at best. He switched tactics, sending a carefully worded email expressing regret for any misunderstandings and suggesting we meet to discuss a more appropriate distribution that honors Dad while acknowledging family bonds. I declined the invitation. A non-apology focused on money rather than the actual issue would not sway me. Allison tried a different approach, sending lavish flower arrangements to the house daily with cards expressing increasingly desperate apologies. When that didn't work, she called our extended family members, trying to enlist them to talk sense into me. My sister Judith called, concerned. "Eva, the kids say you've had some kind of breakdown," she began cautiously. "They're worried about you making rash decisions while grieving." "Did they tell you they skipped their father's funeral?" I asked simply. A long pause. "No, they didn't mention that part." "Richard stood alone at each of their graduations, taking photos and beaming with pride," I told her. "I stood alone at his funeral. Tell me which of us is being unreasonable." Judith had no answer for that. Sophia's tactics were the most direct. She began showing up regularly, sometimes with groceries or prepared meals, sometimes just to sit with me and talk about seemingly neutral topics. At first, I was suspicious of her sudden attentiveness, but as the weeks passed, I began to see glimmers of genuine change. During one visit, as she helped me sort through Richard's clothing for donation, she paused while folding one of his favorite sweaters. "I keep expecting him to walk through the door," she said quietly, her fingers tracing the worn elbow patches he had insisted on keeping despite my offers to replace the sweater. "It doesn't feel real that he's gone." "I know," I replied. "Every morning I still make coffee for 2 before I remember." We worked in silence for a while before she spoke again. "I really messed up, didn't I? Not just the funeral, but the last few years." It was the first time any of my children had approached something like genuine remorse. "Yes," I answered honestly. "You did." "Can I ask you something?" Sophia looked up from the sweater she was still holding. "The charities you chose, why those specific ones?" I explained the connection to Richard's life, the Scholarship Foundation for Future Teachers, the Heart Research Organization, the community center where he had volunteered. "He would have liked that," Sophia admitted. "Using the money to help others learn and grow. That was always his thing, wasn't it? Helping people realize their potential?" "It was," I agreed, surprised by her insight. That conversation marked a turning point with Sophia. While James continued his legalistic approach and Allison her emotional manipulation, Sophia began a quieter journey toward understanding. She asked questions about Richard's last days, listened to stories about his teaching career, and even volunteered once at the community center, though I suspected it was partly to report back on where her money was going. 3 months after the funeral, I attended my first event at one of the organizations benefiting from Richard's estate, a scholarship award ceremony at the Education Foundation. The foundation had created the Richard Howard Teaching Scholarship, with our donation providing full tuition for 5 students pursuing teaching degrees. When I mentioned the event to my children, only Sophia expressed interest in attending. We sat together as 5 young people received the scholarships named for Richard, each sharing their dreams of becoming teachers and making a difference in their communities. One young man's speech particularly touched me. "I grew up believing education was something that happened to you, not something you participated in," he said. "Until my 10th grade math teacher showed me that learning could be a conversation, not a lecture. That teacher changed my life, and now I want to do the same for others." Beside me, Sophia wiped away unexpected tears. "That could have been Dad's student," she whispered. "That's exactly what he believed about teaching." After the ceremony, as we drove home together, Sophia was unusually quiet. Finally, she asked, "Do you think you'll ever forgive us? Truly forgive us, I mean?" I considered the question carefully before answering. "Forgiveness isn't the issue, Sophia. I forgive you. But trust is rebuilt through actions, not words. Your father deserved better from all of you. So did I, for that matter. Showing up once for a scholarship ceremony doesn't erase years of distance or the ultimate disrespect of missing his funeral." "I know," she said quietly. "I'm trying to figure out who I became and how to find my way back." It was the most honest thing any of my children had said since Richard died, and it gave me the first real hope that something positive might eventually emerge from this painful episode. As the months passed, the initial furor over the inheritance gradually subsided. James, after his attorney confirmed he had no legal recourse, became coldly formal in limited communications, clearly viewing me as an adversary rather than a mother. Allison's approach cycled between emotional outbursts and calculated charm, neither proving effective at changing my decision. Only Sophia showed signs of genuine reflection and change. She began visiting regularly without obvious agenda, sometimes helping with household tasks, sometimes just keeping me company. During one such visit, she noticed Richard's journal on the coffee table. "Did you ever read our letters?" she asked hesitantly, referring to the sealed envelopes Richard had left for each child. "No," I admitted. "They were for you, not me. I sent them along with my letters." Sophia looked down at her hands. Mine basically said he was proud of my accomplishments, but wished I hadn't lost sight of what makes life meaningful. Connections, family, being present for important moments. Her voice cracked slightly. "He wrote that his biggest regret was not finding a way to keep us close as a family, and that he hoped someday we would remember what matters before it was too late." I couldn't speak past the sudden tightness in my throat. "The thing is," Sophia continued, "I didn't even open it until after I got your letter about the will. I was so focused on being angry about the money that I almost threw it away unopened." She met my eyes directly. "That's when I realized how right you were. About all of it." That conversation marked a genuine turning point. While James and Allison remained entrenched in their anger and sense of entitlement, Sophia began a slower, more meaningful journey toward reclaiming the values Richard and I had tried to instill. 6 months after the funeral, I attended a heart disease awareness event sponsored in part by our donation. Sophia accompanied me without being asked. 8 months after, when the community center opened a new adult education wing named after Richard, she helped organize the event and spoke briefly about her father's commitment to lifelong learning. A year after Richard's death, I invited all 3 children to a memorial service at our home. James declined with a terse email about prior commitments. Allison initially accepted but canceled the day before. Sophia not only came, but brought a photo album she had created filled with family photos and stories she had written about growing up with Richard as a father. That evening, as we sat looking through the album, Sophia asked quietly, "Are you happy with your decision about the inheritance, I mean?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm at peace with it," I finally answered. "The money is doing good work in the world, work that would make your father proud. One child has found her way back to family values. The other two may yet learn, or they may not. Either way, there were consequences for choices just as there should be." Sophia nodded slowly. "I think I understand now. It was never about punishing us. It was about honoring Dad by living his values." "Exactly," I confirmed, squeezing her hand. "Family means showing up especially when it's difficult. Money can't buy that kind of commitment. It has to come from the heart." In the years since Richard's death, I've found a new purpose volunteering with the organizations that benefit from his legacy. Dozens of future teachers have received scholarships in his name. The Heart Research Foundation has funded promising studies that may help prevent others from suffering, as Richard did. The Community Center continues to help adults transform their lives through education. James eventually softened his position slightly, though our relationship remains formal and distant. Allison cycles between extended absences and bursts of attention, still struggling to understand that connection requires consistency, not grand gestures. Sophia has genuinely changed, rearranging her priorities to make room for family and meaningful relationships. She visits regularly, calls often, and has become involved with the Scholarship Foundation, mentoring recipients and sharing her father's story. On difficult days, when I miss Richard most acutely, I find comfort knowing that his legacy continues not through material inheritance, but through changed lives, including, perhaps most surprisingly, the life of our youngest daughter, who learned the hard way what truly matters. As I look back on that lonely funeral and the decision I made the following morning, I realize that Richard was right. I needed to be angry, then sad, then find a way to live meaningfully again. In honoring his values, even when it was difficult, I found a path forward that has brought unexpected peace and purpose. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that others didn't understand? What values would you want your own legacy to reflect? If you've enjoyed this story, please hit the like button, subscribe to hear more of my experiences, and share with someone who might need a reminder about what truly matters in life. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, it's never too late to realign your priorities with your deepest values.